Hello, and welcome to the Producers Guild conversation with the creative team behind Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always. We'd like to thank our friends at Focus Features for making this event possible. It is my pleasure to introduce our moderator today, Nina Jacobson. p.g.a member Nina Jacobson built an impressive career as a senior film executive at 3 major motion picture studios before founding the independent company Color Force in 2007. Jacobson has produced the Hunger Games franchise, grossing $2.9 billion worldwide, the groundbreaking feature Crazy Rich Asians, and the Diary of a Wimpy Kid series. Jacobson and her partner, Brad Simpson, have executive produced The People vs. O.J. Simpson, American Crime Story, and The Assassination of Gianni Versace, American Crime Story, which received 2 Emmys and 2 Golden Globes. Color Force is currently in production on Impeachment, American Crime Story, Why, The Last Man, and the 3rd season of Pose. Welcome, Nina. Welcome, panelists. And please, Nina, take it away.
Thank you. As I told you all earlier, it's really a thrill for me to be able to moderate a panel with you because I loved your movie so much. And I think you're all, pretty great. So, I'll start, Eliza, with start at the beginning. What was the creative spark for the movie, and what did you do with that spark once you had it?
Yeah, the spark for the film came in 2012. I was just reading the newspaper and I read a story that really broke my heart. And it was about the death of Savita Halappanavar. She was a dentist in Ireland who was denied a life-saving abortion and died. Wow. And from there, I started reading about what is insensitively coined as abortion tourism, the journey that women take all over the world when they can't get access. And I think as a filmmaker, I'm inspired to tell stories that are suppressed, stories that are omitted, and things that people don't speak about. And so I saw this journey as an opportunity to explore, a very important issue to me, which is abortion access, women's rights, and to tell a powerful personal journey. I really just started reading a lot. Like, I knew I wasn't going to make a film in Ireland because I'm not an Irish filmmaker. And I asked myself, like, what does that journey look like in the United States? And, so many people travel over 80 miles for an abortion clinic. So I started just doing a lot of research, and I think there's part of me that's always envious of like a documentary process and wants to be out in the world doing field work and talking to people and really understanding these experiences firsthand. I'm not somebody who loves to just sit at a computer and go into my imagination. I'm somebody who wants to go into the world.
Right.
So that's what I did. Yeah.
And then how did the 3 of you, how did you come together? How do you work together? How does each team, I think, works differently together. Each movie, even with the same people, works differently sometimes. So once you had what did you do to end up, collaborating the 3 of you together?
Yeah.
Well, I was just going to say it's cool listening to you talk about the timeline for the movie, Eliza, because I kind of remember talking to you about it back in like 2012, because I think that was kind of around when we met.
13.
Yeah, like it was around the sort of beginning of our friendship. And then it was an idea that you went away from and you made another movie, and then you came back to, and when you came back to it, we meaning Sarah and I, were now a producing team inside of a company that didn't exist when you and I first met. So it was kind of cool to watch how the idea it had, I guess it had a hold for you, and I think for me, and then of course, I think for Sara, it also resonated. How do we work together?
I think it started, Adele was involved with the script.
Yeah.
There
Right.
was Sara at that point, and Adele was a big cheerleader and champion, and it can be very isolating to write a script.
So you're sharing drafts with Adele pretty early on in the process of like sharing drafts, getting feedback, and doing that collaboration pretty early.
Yeah. I think, I think one of the big challenges is sometimes as a writer, you have the idea for the film and you can write as many treatments as you want, but you don't necessarily have the connection to the character. So I spend a lot of time just like writing pages, like trying to find the character. And Adele read a lot of those. And then I think it was right when I finally like forced myself through the draft.
Right.
That she read a full draft. But
Yeah, I do remember reading, like, it was a collection of scenes, like it was long form scriptment type stuff that you would share. And I love when that's the process, when a writer, director wants to share early while it's still, not quite fully formed, and feels confident being vulnerable at that time with the idea.
Yeah.
I actually remember like sitting on a beach at one point reading something you had sent me, and I don't know why I was on the beach, but it was so early days.
Yeah, you were like in Spain or something. I don't remember. You're always somewhere else in the world. It's hard to keep track of all the pins that you must have in the globe by now.
But yeah, I do remember that. I particularly enjoy when that is the process, and that was the process with you. Yeah.
And in production and casting and all of the sort of stations along the way, how do you guys collaborate? What's the nature of it, of your, do you have the areas, what are the areas that you have like the sort of easiest go of it, and what are the areas with the most tug of war creatively, or are there usually in a good relationship? There are.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm somebody who takes a lot of risks, especially in terms of casting. And I'd say that was probably, where Adele and Sara had to relinquish a certain amount of trust, to me, because I'm somebody who's always searching for what I think will be the deepest performance. And some of that is instinct, and some of that is just experience and how I work. And I think that was maybe a moment that we all had in terms of like, who's going to carry this movie and what does that mean for like the commercial life of the film. I don't know if we were able to like articulate all of those concerns in the heat and the pressure of pulling the film together, but I think they were definitely like under the line in some ways.
Right. I mean, as producers, I imagine you guys are always going to push for something that you think will maximize accessibility for the film, to make sure that as many people can see it as possible. And sometimes that means just making sure you really nail it with the exact right person. And sometimes that means casting somebody people have heard of. So, and for you guys, as producers, were you comfortable with the fact that, it is, I mean, I wanted to ask you actually about the casting, because I think that casting is one of the most distinctive things about the movie is the casting and how grounded each character is, how honest each character feels. There's not a false note. There's nobody who feels like they're in a different movie than anybody else. And I understand that you guys had also, non-professional actors in some of the roles, which is always a risk, of course. So obviously would love to hear you guys talk about that, both from a creative standpoint, but also from a producing standpoint, knowing that as producers, say, what a producer would push for isn't necessarily always what a filmmaker is pushing for in a situation like this.
Yeah. No, I think it's right. I mean, I think it was I think knowing Eliza's previous work and sort of, I don't know, her impeccable ability to find the right people and the right moment in all of her previous films, I think there was a certain level of inherent trust, I think, that we had. Not, you're sort of voicing all your concerns in the moments of whether somebody can carry it, but I think at some point, I think it is about trusting the filmmaker, and particularly with Eliza, I think that made it easier just with the track record that she had.
Were you guys together for casting, the three of you? Or would you be in a room together, or were you in the same place?
We were, yeah. Yeah.
So tell me about finding these, your leads. And obviously, I'm sure you've talked about it a ton, but tell me about finding them.
Well, Sydney Flanagan, who plays Autumn, it's a long story, but I produced a nonfiction film a long time ago, and I met her. And because this nonfiction film that had all these kids in it, we were adding them on Facebook as a way to like track them and ask them to come and be a part of the shoot. And just sort of accidentally, she kept showing up in my news feed for years on Facebook. And like a voyeur, I felt like I was watching a coming of age story, but like a really raw one. And a lot of emotion. And she would post videos of herself performing. And even in 2013, when I had this treatment for the movie, I wrote her about it.
Wow.
So she was like always in my mind. I just never really thought she would do it or be interested. And then we launched this big search that was challenging for a lot of reasons. And I kept kind of in my mind coming back to her. And I really, pushed to bring her, into the fold and to see if she would do it and to start the conversations and let her read the scripts and let's Skype about it. Let's bring her to New York and, testing out what that might be like. I did an extensive audition with her. I took her out into the city. I made video sketches of her. I did scenes with her. And it became hard to imagine anybody else. She was always in my mind,
right?
In a way.
Yeah, she was always in your mind, and I think there's always this component to like when you're casting people from more real life situations. There's always a little bit of an unknown, even whether they're gonna be willing to come on for the ride.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I remember too, like she was always in your mind. And at the same time, we were continuing forward with the process in both traditional and non-traditional casting routes, not totally knowing if Sydney would ultimately say yes, when you asked her, right?
Were you guys already at Focus when you were? We didn't actually talk about the kind of timeline of when of how the movie found distribution ultimately. And so I guess we should hit that at some point to see who was involved in the casting decisions besides the three of you, or was the circle the three of you?
Three of us plus Rose from the BBC, who was also an early champion, who I think you were probably sharing some of the early script stuff with.
So they were financing the casting search.
Yeah. Did we talk outside of that core group much about cast? I
think Leo was involved also in casting, and I think Alex Orlovsky was also involved in casting.
Yeah.
And so did you have to fight for the right to cast who you wanted, or did you, given that obviously you made the choice to cast with people who were perfect for the role regardless of their profile, did you have to fight for that?
I think, Rose and Alex and Leo liked Sydney early on, and their reaction was warm.
Right.
And then it was a question of like, who can we find to match how real and natural she is. And that was
Mhm.
almost the challenge.
Yes. Right.
But they were always so supportive. I mean, they were supportive in that I think there was an assumption that we were probably going to find somebody, a non-actor, from the beginning. So I think they were, you know, excited about who we were going to find, but there were no parameters in terms of financing.
We hired casting directors who have like a specialty in doing these non-traditional searches. So I think there was no illusion about how I wanted to make the film.
Right. Nobody thought you were going to cast Zendaya.
No.
Right.
No.
And so then how much did you end up making the movie for? And slash, how the hell did you pull off so many New York locations?
I still can't answer the second question, but
it really does make the producer head explode to watch the movie and to think about trying to shoot there at the same time. I just have to like block out all thoughts. And
well, I think I was naive because I've shot a lot of films in New York, but they're always like on the beaches that nobody goes to. So I don't think I had like a real sense of how hard it would be to go into Midtown, because it wasn't something I'd done, even though I'd made, several films in New York before, but it was truly nightmarish.
yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead, Sarah.
No, I was going to say, I mean, we had a very nimble crew, but it was, we definitely moved a lot. We moved a lot. I feel like we had companies, like 3 company moves sometimes.
I mean, we had Planned Parenthood. Sorry, what's that, Nina?
What time of year did you shoot?
Dead of winter.
February, March.
Right around now.
It was freezing. It was so cold.
Nice.
Yeah, it was so cold. I mean, we had early in the process, we had the support of Planned Parenthood. So that was a little bit of relief around some of our primary locations, but like, that's still just like tip of the iceberg in terms of how many places we were around the city. I don't know how we did it. We were sub 3 million. Like several hundred thousands of dollars, sub 3 million. I don't remember exactly.
That's a mind blower, I gotta say, for that.
Blowing our minds, forcing us to like re-examine the process. It definitely was hard.
I can only imagine, next say New York is such a challenge, and then to be right there smack in the middle of the city, to be able to pull it off, that's really amazing. That's incredibly impressive. And see, though, it's interesting because, New York obviously is such a location you see a million times. And I love actually just how subjective the point of view of New York was. It's just what they need. That's just what they came to do. They're not there, to go for a walk in Central Park.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I also really love that nothing terrible happens to the girls, their friendship is always affirmed, and I love the moment where they hold hands while she's kissing Jasper. But I also love that he was actually an okay guy, also, that there, and I wondered, like, what myths and tropes were there myths and tropes you wanted to defy?
Mm-hmm.
Did you think about that, at all, or this was just organically the story you wanted to tell and it just happened to defy, like say, a lot of myths and tropes from in every way, like I say, the New York road movie, the New York based story like this, and certainly the story of 2 girls on their own in the big city.
Yeah, I think my work lives in like gray zone. Sorry, I don't know why I have a little echo. Is it okay?
Good now.
You're better. Yeah.
Gray zones We never go into extremes. And that's something that I'm kind of always calibrating, and sort of feeling the rails on either side. Well, what if, like, obviously I knew she wasn't going to get raped in New York, but there was a draft where that scene got rougher. And then I was like, nope, too far, pull it back. I obviously was sensitive to all of the tropes around abortion that we're trying to move past. She's not going to experience like psychological damage from it. She doesn't grapple with the morality of it. Those were all things that I feel that the conversation should move beyond.
Right.
So yeah, I think for me, it's about calibration. Like sometimes I push things, but then I'm kind of aware and try and pull them back, and the scene, with Jasper is important. And it's important that we as an audience and as a culture begin to examine that kind of male privilege and entitlement. Like, is he being charming on the bus, or is he kind of not picking up on their signals to leave them alone? Is he being charming or intrusive? Like, the film in a way is asking the audience to sort of ask those questions. Is he, being too pushy? Like, is he, does she want him to touch her leg in the karaoke scene? Or is this a moment where she's losing control of what's happening? And for me, it's important, that there be some level of questioning from the audience. Like, what do these moments mean in 2020, 2021?
Yeah, I felt, say part of what I found so interesting about it was, say that on the one hand, you painted him like, say he's, kind of certainly doesn't feel threatening, the likable dork kind of guy, but who at the same time, it feels very transactional, the relationship. And the girls know that it is, more than he does, but I think, like say, I think all of those choices were interesting because it does a sort of, it teeters on the line. But I thought that, like say, at every point that it felt like say at every point that there was a choice always to go, more complex, more grounded, and ultimately, more provocative because of it. Have you watched the movie with kids the age of these characters, and what's that been like?
Yeah. Well, I have spent a lot of the year working with Planned Parenthood and doing regional outreach and meeting with groups of teenagers to discuss sex education and access and legislation. And I think it's been interesting. People have questions about the sensibility of the film. They have questions about the style of it, and they have questions about the character's journey. And that's been, exciting to talk about it in the context of the country that we live in.
Yeah. And how much heat did you guys take for the movie's politics? Did you did you feel like you were in the middle of really controversial space, or you feel like you're just sort of like in the middle of making your movie?
No, Sarah.
I think we knew the potential conflict that could arise, I think. And I think we were taking sort of precautionary steps along the way, both in casting and outreach. And when we were shooting in Pennsylvania, sort of being a little bit more protective of what the movie was about and why we were there. we did have like some incidents in casting because we were sort of infiltrating these schools and, you know, communities where people were a little confused as to what we were doing there. And I think, you know, we did feel a little bit of, we realized in those moments how careful we needed to be. We were being invasive, and how, you know, what information can we give without it preventing us from being there and moving forward in both casting and locations. But yeah, I mean, I think we were scared in a little bit at the beginning. But obviously once we got into New York, I think we felt very embraced, and obviously Planned Parenthood, a lot of the locations. And I think, you know, the politics around the film, I think people were supportive of that. It was a different environment.
And then, you know, one of my favorite quotes is from, you know, Jean-Luc Godard, that it's not to make political films, but to make films politically. And, you know, you guys really did both. And you know, you have you know, looking at the lineup, you know, behind the camera of your crew, and positions of real power, you know, you have far more of those positions occupied by women than men on this movie, which is, as you know, unusual. So how did your crew come together? How did you, the people who you brought together, how many of them were people you'd worked with before as department heads? How many of them did you recruit? And you want to just jump in on that from a producing and directing? Oh, I guess mostly in a producing standpoint from all of you, and directing, I guess, as well.
Yeah, I think we have like sort of the opposite, you know, like women are usually editors, men are usually cinematographers. We have sort of
I noticed that actually.
inverted, you know, the norm, I would say. My DP, Hélène Louvart, worked with me on Beach Rats. I had worked with Olga Mill, who's a costume designer, fabulous costume designer.
She's actually working on Why the Last Man for us right now.
Awesome.
Yeah, I've had to close up the Q take so I don't get distracted watching what's happening on set there while I'm talking to you. So I've closed it up.
Amazing.
Awesome. Go on. Yes.
Sorry. Yeah. She's a really, really, you know, incredible collaborator.
Yes.
And has such good ideas about character and place, and understands what it means to like work from an authentic location. And yeah, who else is there? You guys.
Meredith for our production design. I mean, I think it was a combination of bringing back people that you had worked with and had relationships with. And then, I mean, we're definitely conscious of our hiring power, and then the roles that we're in when it comes to filling out crews. So it's conscious, for sure. For sure, it's conscious to be trying to like staff more in our own gender image, after many, many years of men staffing in their own gender image. So
we, you know, on Why the Last Man, it's the first show I've done where pretty much all of our department heads, with a couple of exceptions, but pretty much all of our department heads are women. And what's remarkable to me is that it's the least on-set drama, you know, on and behind the scenes of any show I've ever worked on, because I think there's less privilege and entitlement, right? So people are less used to getting away with a lot of bad behavior or whatever, or maybe, but I don't know. It's been a really interesting thing to see of any show I've ever worked on. My predominantly female department head show has had the least amount of like drama on set.
It's very good energy, right? Like when you take out some of the testosterone.
It's also about finding the right kind of testosterone to bring into the mix.
Yeah, no, and it's, I mean, but it's also about, like I said, I think it's also about, yes, that the men who are there are men who are comfortable being around a lot of women.
Yeah.
Right. Like they're not going to be there otherwise. But it's just an interesting thing. I think that, you know, there is something about a lot of the bad behavior is just facilitated by years of enabling and entitlement. But like I say, not a lot of women have had a chance to get comfortable enough to become assholes, you know. Oops, was I not supposed to say that in the panel? Whoops, sorry. Anyhow, well, they can cut that out if it was inappropriate. So in doing press for the movie, is there any question that you wish people would ask or that you would like me to ask that we can round out our conversation with? Anything you feel like we didn't cover?
I don't know. You guys, what do you think? I've been doing this for over a year.
I know, that's why I thought maybe there's something that no one has like.
No,
okay,
I'm just
let's
I
scratch.
talk. You guys talk. I've been strapped to a computer for really over 12 months.
You know, you get to the point when that's a long haul and you also, you're just like, oh my God, I'm so sick of myself. You spend so much time hearing yourself talk about your movie that you're like, oh. So, but is there anything you feel like doesn't ever get covered?
I don't know, I guess, you know, from your perspective, you know, given the sort of like politicized issue, I don't know. I don't know what I'm going to say. You guys, what do you want to talk about?
You're so much better at talking about it.
No, I mean, the only thing I was thinking just now, which has nothing to do specifically with the film, but the experience that we're having right now around the film, like, God, it's such a bummer that we're just not standing together in a theater after presenting the film and like vibing off each other's live energy. Yeah, that's been an interesting way to, I mean, yeah, I don't know. That's a big issue. I'm not gonna start unpacking that in our wrap up, but.
No, it is. That's a complicated one. Although the one thing I imagine is, I must imagine that the film's reach with streaming now, for all of the pressures that streaming puts on the movie business and on theatrical, I must imagine that you've reached a lot of people that you probably never imagined you could reach back.
Yeah, maybe that's a question.
2012 versus today.
Yeah, do you notice anything, Eliza, like in the way in which this movie's been released compared to your other films, by which I mean like the streaming and everyone being at home? Have you noticed a different conversation or like a different engagement from folks? Like people are continuing to discover the film longer, or people who wouldn't feel comfortable seeing in a theater because of
It's
the
obviously
or
so hard to tell given the circumstances. I mean, I think we're very lucky that we've had so much critical support that's carried the movie for a year. I don't know like the reach of the film. I don't have a sense of it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't.
I mean, the one thing that we do, I mean, it is very hard to know. And, you know, and by the way, all you know when your movie's released theatrically is you know which theaters are doing well, but you don't know that much about who's watching it in that regard, other than like the broadest demographic data. But I do think that there are ways that a movie like this, in being available to somebody, you know, who doesn't have to, you know, be asked for permission, you know, but for a young person, especially, to be able to watch this movie, you know, and for so many women around the country who really might not ever go to see a movie like this in the theater, but who would watch it and could be greatly impacted by it. So knowing, you know, there has to, I think there is that reach. I wonder, have you heard from, like, say, you've obviously been traveling with it, and so you've heard from a lot of young people, and I'm sure, I have to think that it speaks to them in how much it doesn't patronize, how it does not condescend in any way, shape, or form. And so I have to imagine it's really impacted young people who've seen it.
Yeah, I hope so. I hope so. Yeah, I mean, I think I could say, you know, like one thing that's important to mention about the collaboration is that Adele and Sara, like really, I know this is probably funny for you, Nina, but they set the bar high with the budget, actually, you know, and they didn't waver. And I think that a lot of companies look at work by women, work, that, there's a very hollowed out image of women that exists on film, in this industry. And to look at something more complicated is something that we're not ready to do. And that work is devalued. And what Adele and Sara brought to the process is they raised the bar with the budget, and they said, this is what Eliza needs to make this movie, and she shouldn't have anything less. And it was a hard process to get people on board, and they did not give up.
Well, that's amazing. That is the fight, to fight for a movie like this, especially when we go and you talk about, say, the locations and just how freaking hard it is to shoot in New York and in Midtown the way that you did, and to be able to do it with the cast of your choice based on performance.
And 16 millimeter.
Yeah, and on 16 millimeter. I mean, it's an amazing thing to be able to have fought for and won, and that really is, it is a Producers Guild panel, and that is, pretty badass producing. And what, in achieving that, I mean, did you feel like you just weren't going to back you and that eventually they were just going to sort of stare it down until somebody had to blink?
Kind of. No, I mean, I think we also, I think in setting this, the number that we set, it's always never enough. So I think but it's at some point you've been told the number it should be so many times that you're like, okay, well, what, how far, I guess you have to choose how far you can stretch it and the realities of that. But it was kind of that. We really did. I mean, a lot of people came to us and offered us less money. People that I think we would have wanted to work with and partner with potentially on a creative standpoint, but it wasn't enough. And it was really the support of BBC and Rose, who sort of helped us push it as high as we could get it. And they enabled us to bring on additional partners and make it work. But it was, you're still, when you're doing it, I think there's this thing where you're like, I don't know. I guess that's the thing, is you just never have enough. It's never enough. And I think it always deserves more. And especially Eliza and her work, it was sort of like, not only does she deserve the resources, like what could she do with the resources if they were given her? And I think it was a no-brainer in terms of wanting to champion it and go for it and fight for it. And I think it's, it is, I have never, to be honest, like, have never heard so many people tell us no before this one, because we needed more money for a story that I think people thought was small.
Right.
But it's ambitious for all the reasons that we already touched on.
Yeah.
And also it's, I mean, this is Eliza's third film, and people, I mean, obviously, you have a lot of fans based on your previous work and people who wanted to work with you, but were coming to us with like first feature level budgets.
Yeah.
First female feature level.
Yeah. And saying like, that's crazy. Like she's proven, there's no doubt about what you're going to, you have the script. The script is supreme. You know what the film is going to be. Eliza's already delivered twice on that promise.
Right.
Like, this isn't high risk.
Yep.
Beyond the ways in which movies are always risk, right?
Yep.
Yeah, it was quite frustrating.
No, it is. Every time, with I still think, yes, for female directors, for female writers, for stars, across, the board, there's always like having to prove again that yes, in fact, there are huge audiences and deep audiences and abiding audiences for all kinds of content that is not focused on white men. Shockingly enough. But it is always a fight to get the resources, unless it's, say, somehow, and a certain type of movie, Yeah, but particularly, yeah, I think you're right. A devaluation of stories that are inherently more complex and demanding and female driven takes a fight. And I'm glad you guys had each other to fight that fight. But yeah, that's a good wrapping up place.
Thank you, Nina.
Thank you,
My
Nina.
pleasure.